At the southern edge of Japan, nearly closer to Taiwan than Tokyo, there is a place where people still leave their doors open, where strangers become neighbors, where some of the longest living people on Earth wake not to alarms, but to the sound of the sea. And somehow, in a world obsessed with speed, they've chosen to move slower. But it isn't just paradise beneath these blue waters. And beneath this quiet life lies a history of kingdoms, war, occupation, and a question that becomes impossible to ignore. What makes people stay here? Far south of mainland Japan, beyond the crowded bullet trains, beyond the neon skylines, beyond the image most people carry when they imagine Japan, another world begins. This is Okinawa. Scattered across more than 1,000 kilometers of warm Pacific water lies a chain of over 160 islands. Not one island, but fragments. Coral rising from the sea. Pieces of land suspended between Asia, Japan, and the wider Pacific. A subtropical edge of the Japanese state, where the air itself feels different. Softer, saltier, heavier with humidity. The moment you arrive, you feel it. Hibiscus flowers bloom beside concrete seawalls. Turquoise water presses against coastlines shaped as much by nature as by human intervention. Beaches open into horizons of impossible blue. Azure skies above, white sand below. But just beyond that postcard beauty, another reality emerges. Here, the ocean is not simply scenery. It is livelihood. It is memory. It is identity. For generations, Okinawa has existed in a space between worlds. Between Japan and something not entirely Japan. A place shaped by centuries of outside powers. Shifting borders and competing identities. An island chain caught in what scholars describe as a triangular relationship. Between Okinawa, mainland Japan, and the United States. And that tension is visible everywhere. Tourists arrive searching for paradise. Drawn by images of white beaches, luxury resorts, and the promise of a laid-back island escape. Many never look beyond the beach umbrella, but step away from the resorts And Okinawa tells a different story. Concrete has transformed much of the natural coastline. Riverways and beaches have been reshaped. Coral reefs face pressure from environmental degradation. Entire towns live beside massive military installations that occupy enormous portions of the land. In some places, the sound of waves is interrupted by aircraft overhead. In others, local livelihoods depend on the very structures many wish would disappear. That contradiction defines Okinawa. Beauty and burden, freedom and dependence. Even the sunlight feels slower here, less urgent. And for many people who live on these islands, that slower rhythm is not simply lifestyle. It is resistance, a way of preserving identity, a way of holding on to something uniquely Okinawan, even while larger powers continue to shape the land around them. This is not just Japan's tropical getaway. This is Okinawa, the hidden end of Asia. A place where history lingers in the air like salt. And every beautiful view carries a deeper story. There's a phrase people here use, Okinawa time. At first, it sounds like an excuse for lateness, but it's something much deeper. Schedule spent. Conversations matter more than efficiency. A neighbor stops by, tea is poured. Plans can wait. On mainland Japan, precision is sacred. Here, human connection comes first. You feel it immediately. No rushing. No invisible pressure. Just the quiet permission to breathe. Before the sun fully rises, before the heat settles into the streets, before the island begins to move at full pace. The day begins with the sea. Not metaphorically, literally. In Okinawa, the ocean enters daily life before anything else. It shapes the first hours of morning, the first labor, the first conversations, the first quiet acknowledgements between people whose routines have followed this same rhythm for generations. Small fishing boats return in near silence. Their engines murmur low against the water. Their hulls sit heavy, weighted with the night's harvest. Tuna, reef fish, seaweed gathered from waters that remain central not only to livelihood, but to Okinawan social life itself. Nothing about their arrival feels dramatic. No shouting, no rush. Only practiced movement. The docks wake slowly. Metal hooks clink against railings. Wet ropes drag across wooden boards. Water slaps rhythmically against the sides of the boats. Steady, familiar, almost comforting. A fisherman pauses before unloading. He lights his first cigarette. The flame flickers briefly in the soft blue light of dawn. He says nothing. No one does. Words are unnecessary here. This is ritual. A repeated choreography of labor and memory. Ordinary, quiet, and deeply rooted in the structures of island life that continue to organize daily existence beyond what visitors usually see. Nearby, the local market begins to stir. One shutter lifts, then another. A low hum builds. Elderly women begin arranging vegetables with deliberate care. Bitter melon. Purple sweet potatoes. Produce placed not simply for sale, but with the attention of people who understand exactly who will come to buy them. They know every customer, every household, every family connection. Transactions happen. But this is not merely commerce. It is recognition. It is continuity. A conversation remembered from yesterday resumes today without introduction. A shared recipe becomes an exchange of family history. A simple greeting becomes confirmation that everyone is still here. This is not shopping, it is social memory. A living archive carried not in monuments or official histories, but in everyday routines, in familiar faces, in repeated gestures, in the quiet ways Okinawan communities continue to preserve themselves through ordinary acts of care. Before tourists wake, before beaches fill, before the island becomes an image. This is Okinawa's first voice. The sea, the market, the ritual of belonging. And as morning light slowly spreads across the harbor, you begin to understand. Here the day does not begin with urgency. It begins with memory. In many villages, doors stay open. Not because people forgot, not because security doesn't matter, but because trust still lives here. It lives quietly, in habits so ordinary they almost disappear. A front gate left unlatched. Shoes waiting outside an empty doorway. A kitchen window open to the street. No one thinks twice about it. Because in many Okinawan communities, the boundary between your home and your neighbor's home has never been entirely fixed. Life is still organized through relationships, through daily dependence, recognition, and mutual obligation that tie people to one another in practical ways. Children move freely between houses. A grandmother watches them without being asked. A neighbor calls them inside for water. Another reminds them to be home before sunset. No one needs formal permission. Everyone already belongs. Across low coral stone walls, small exchanges happen almost automatically. A conversation begun in the morning and resumed hours later, as if no time has passed. Nothing is recorded. Nothing is announced. But everyone remembers who helped during the last storm, who is caring for an aging parent, who recently lost someone. And when hardship comes, as it inevitably does, the response is immediate. If a roof is damaged after a typhoon, if floodwater enters a home, if repairs are too much for one family to carry, the street arrives not as charity, as expectation. Hands bring tools, ladders appear. Debris is cleared, wood is lifted. Work begins, together. This is not extraordinary. It is simply how community functions. A lived social ethic rooted in collective responsibility and shared belonging. An understanding that individual well-being has always depended on the strength of the group. There is a name for this spirit, Yuimaru, shared burden. A way of organizing life through cooperation rather than isolation. Not a slogan, a practical structure that still shapes how people care for one another. In much of the modern world, community has become something people remember. Something people say they miss. Apartment doors that close and stay closed. Lives lived side by side but separately. But here, community is not an idea. It is still useful, still visible, still necessary. It lives in open doors, in borrowed tools, in shared meals, in roofs rebuilt together. And perhaps that is what feels most striking. Not simply that trust survives here, but that it remains part of daily life. Not preserved for visitors. Not performed for tradition. Simply practiced, quietly, every day. To understand Okinawa, you have to forget for a moment that it's Japan. Not completely, but enough to see what existed here, long before modern borders defined it. Because for centuries, these islands were something else entirely. The Ryukyu Kingdom. An independent maritime polity, positioned not at the edge of Asia, but at its crossroads. A place whose strength did not come from territorial conquest or military expansion, but from connection, from exchange, from diplomacy. Ships moved constantly through these waters, to China, to Korea, to Southeast Asia, to Japan. Ideas moved with them, languages, crafts, religious practices, political influence. Okinawa was not isolated. It was a meeting point, a place where identities layered rather than replaced one another, where outside influences arrived not as domination alone, but as relationships to be negotiated. A kingdom shaped through contact, absorbing, adapting, transforming what passed through its ports. That history still lives here. Not always in monuments, not always in official narratives, but in quieter things, in the sound of the sunshin, 3 strings, a body wrapped in snakeskin, a melody that carries something older than memory itself. Its music feels intimate, not performed at you, but shared beside you. A sound that seems to hold grief and joy in the same breath. A reminder that history can survive not only in books, but in vibration. It lives in Bingata textiles, patterns alive with color, carefully made, layered with inherited meaning, cloth that carries memory through craftsmanship, through repetition, preservation, and touch. It lives in language, in words spoken at home, in expressions that resist disappearance, words that mark belonging, words that separate inherited identity from national identity. And it lives in dance, in movements repeated across generations. Bodies remembering what politics sometimes tries to simplify. Because Okinawan identity has never been singular. It has been negotiated, protected, reimagined. That is why many Okinawans call themselves Uchinanchu. A name that means more than geography, more than citizenship, not simply Japanese, but not entirely separate. Something older, something shaped by centuries of distinct history and still carried forward in everyday life. A memory that has not disappeared. To outsiders, Okinawa can appear easy to define. An island prefecture, a southern part of Japan. But for many who live here, identity is more layered than that. More complicated, resilient. To understand Okinawa, you have to listen for what remains beneath the surface. In music, language, ritual, and names. And in the quiet insistence of people who remember who they were. Long before the world told them who they should be. These peaceful beaches were once something else entirely. Before they became symbols of escape, before they were photographed for postcards and travel brochures, they became one of the bloodiest battlefields of the Second World War. The Battle of Okinawa, a name that still echoes across these islands. More than 200,000 lives lost, soldiers, civilians, children, Entire families caught between armies. Entire villages erased from the map. Homes destroyed, fields abandoned. Communities shattered in a matter of months. For Okinawa, war was not a distant political event. It was intimate. It entered homes, it entered caves, it entered the daily lives of ordinary people with unbearable force. The source describes how this history remains central to Okinawan collective memory. Part of the lived experience through which identity continues to be shaped. And even now, you can feel that memory beneath the surface. Children play above caves that once sheltered fear, places where families hid in darkness. Listening, waiting, not knowing whether the next sound would mean survival or loss. The same ground that now carries laughter once carried terror. Flowers bloom where bodies once lay. Paths that tourists now walk casually were once crossed by those fleeing violence. The sea that looks so calm today once witnessed devastation. And yet, life returned, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Homes were rebuilt, communities gathered again, markets reopened, children were born into places their grandparents remembered only through destruction. The island healed enough to move forward, but history never fully left. It remains embedded in the landscape. Not always visible, but present, in memorial spaces, in family stories, in silence, in the way remembrance continues to shape how Okinawans understand themselves. Through loss, survival, and the enduring burden of being positioned at the center of larger geopolitical struggles. Because the war ended, but another presence remained. A presence that still occupies physical space, still reminds many Okinawans that history here is never entirely past. On these peaceful beaches, beneath the flowers, beneath the laughter of children, the island remembers, and it asks you to remember too. For decades, Okinawa became a place of fascination. Not because of what was built here, not because of what was exported, but because of how people lived. And how long they kept living. Scientists came searching for answers. How could so many people here reach old age? Not simply surviving into their 90s or hundreds, but living well, still walking, still tending their homes, still laughing with neighbors, still participating in daily life, independent, social, at 90, at 100. Not hidden away from the world, but deeply connected to it. That was what made Okinawa remarkable. It was not only longevity, it was vitality. A way of aging that seemed to resist the isolation and decline that so often define growing older elsewhere. And the answer, it seems, was never just one thing. No single miracle, no single secret. But a pattern, a way of life built slowly, day after day. Food, purpose, community. You can see it in small routines. They practice hara hachibu. Eat until you are 80% full. Not deprivation, not discipline for its own sake, but balance. An understanding that enough can be enough. Meals are not hurried. Food is not simply fuel. It is part of a rhythm, a ritual, a shared moment. They garden, not as exercise, as life. Hands in the soil, bodies in motion. Daily tasks that keep both muscle and memory active. They walk, not to count steps, not to complete a fitness goal. But because movement is woven naturally into ordinary days. To the market, to a neighbor's home. Through familiar streets filled with familiar faces. They laugh, often, easily. Conversations stretch, stories repeat, memories are shared again. Not because they are forgotten, but because retelling them keeps connection alive. And perhaps most importantly, they are rarely alone. That may be the deepest secret of all. In much of the modern world, aging can become a quiet separation. People retreat, communities thin. But here, social life continues. Older people remain part of the fabric, seen, included. Their identity does not disappear with age. It is reinforced by it. Surrounded by familial, neighbors, and routines that remind them every day that they still belong. Perhaps that is what Okinawa teaches best. That a long life is not only measured in years, but in connection, purpose. In shared meals and familiar footsteps. In the comfort of knowing that when morning comes, someone will notice if you are missing. In Okinawa, the food tells the entire story. Not just of taste, but survival of memories. Of a way of life built around care, for the body, for the community. And for the generations that came before. You can read it in every meal. In the bitter melon, sharp, earthy, unapologetic. In island tofu, simple, steady, familiar, something made not to impress but to sustain. In seaweed gathered from surrounding waters, the ocean carried directly to the table. In sweet potatoes, humble, filling, reliable, and in pork, cooked slowly, until it softens completely. Until time itself seems to dissolve into the broth. Nothing here feels rushed, because meals are not separate from daily life. They are part of the structure of it. A pause, a ritual. Moments where nourishment means more than simply being full. Everything feels humble, intentional, no excess or urgency. Only ingredients transformed through patience and care. Here, food is not treated as indulgence. It is something closer to medicine, not metaphorically, literally. A philosophy often expressed as nuchi gusui, food as life's medicine. An understanding that what sustains the body also sustains the spirit. That healing can begin with what is placed on the table. That nourishment is not only nutritional, it is emotional, social, cultural. To eat here is to inherit something. Recipes passed quietly through generations. Flavors remembered from childhood. Techniques repeated without needing to be written down. A grandmother preparing a dish the way her mother once did. A family recognizing home in a single bite. Food is one of those acts. Perhaps the most intimate one, because every meal carries more than ingredients. It carries memory, belonging, history. Many young Okinawans leave. Tokyo, Osaka. Opportunity, speed, ambition. But many come back, not because Okinawa offers more money, it doesn't. Not because life is easier, it isn't. They come back because something here is difficult to replace. Family, silence, belonging. A slower definition of success. Paradise comes with conditions. Typhoons and isolation. Expensive imports. Fragile coral reefs under threat. Climate change, tourism pressure. Living here means accepting vulnerability. But Okinawans understand something many places forget. Nature is not something to conquer, only something to live beside. So why stay? Why choose this small chain of islands? When the world offers endless places to go, bigger cities to chase, faster lives to live. Maybe because Okinawa offers something the modern world is slowly forgetting. A life measured differently, not in deadlines, but in shared meals around familiar tables. In neighbors who still know your name. In conversations that don't need to be rushed. In evenings slow enough to hear the small sounds outside. The movement of wind, the quiet life beyond the walls, the island settling into night. A rhythm that asks less of you and gives something back. Perhaps that is what keeps people here. Roots, deep roots. Entangled with coral, with memory, with sea wind. With generations who have learned that belonging can be more valuable than movement. That a meaningful life may not be the one that expands endlessly outward, but the one that grows quietly, steadily, in place. At the hidden end of Asia, life still moves with the tide. And maybe that's why Okinawa feels less like a destination and more like a question. What would happen if we stopped moving so fast? If we valued belonging over busyness? If home meant more than a place, but a rhythm, a relationship, a way of being? Okinawa does not promise answers. Only a quiet reminder that somewhere between the ocean and the sky, people are still remembering how to live.